Good day, class! Are you excited to learn a new topic? Here, in this video, you will learn the 5 basic seam finishes. Once you've started to get the hang of your sewing machine's basic operations, the next step is to learn how to attach 2 fabric pieces by creating a seam properly. Seams are the primary method of attachment by which almost all sewing projects are created. But before we proceed with the process on how to do this, let us first discuss what seam finishes are. Seam finishes are an essential part of the sewing process. They make the inside of your garment or project look just as neat and clean and professional as the outside. And it also prevents the fabric from fraying and creating a mess. And there are 2 ways to sew seam finishes. It can be sew with a serger or without a serger. If you have a serger, then you are all set to go. Sergers, or also called overlockers, can cut and sew a strong edge finish on woven and knit fabrics. A serger does not replace your regular sewing machine, but rather complements it by finishing the seams. Here, again, in this video, we will focus on sewing seam finishes without a serger. While nice to have, a serger is not necessary for beautiful seam finishes. Do you want to know how to do these seam finishes? Let us understand first how to identify the right and wrong sides of the fabric. Most fabric also has a front and back. On some fabrics, many printed fabrics for example, are obvious which side is the right side. On others, it is a little more subtle. Of course, which surface you decide to show outside of your projects is always up to you. Still, you need to make sure you are marking and sewing consistently on one side or the other. Here, if we mention the right sides facing or the wrong side facing, it actually means that those sides need to be facing each other. Wrong sides facing mean you will put the wrong side facing the wrong side, and you will see the right side out. The same when you do the right side facing, but the other way around, and you will see the wrong side out. Now, let us start with the straight stitch seam. The easiest way to finish the seam is to sew a parallel line to keep the raw edge from unraveling. It is done by right side facing. Sew your seam using the seam allowance. Then sew a straight stitch from the raw edge. Keep your stitches short to help minimize fraying. You will still have some fraying with this technique, but it reduces it considerably. I wouldn't recommend this type of finish on anything that would have an exposed seam. However, it would help strengthen the seam. It would be useful when a seam is hidden if you have a fabric that frays a lot, like flannel lining in a jacket. So this is now your straight stitch seam. As you can see, it's just a basic seam, holding 2 pieces of fabric together, and from the inside, you need to press the seam flat always. They can be used in almost any project, and they can be finished in a variety of ways by pressing flat and then trimming with pinking shears. These are best used for thinner fabrics and looser garments, like flowing t-shirts and blouses. Next is a top stitch. Here, 2 sides, right sides facing. Start with your straight stitch seam. Press it flat and then fold the seam. Facing the outer fabric of your garment, the one on the outside. Then press it again so it stays in place and sew a 1/4 inch seam. Top stitch seam are typically straight stitch seams that are visible from the right side of the fabric. These seams are sewn on top of the right side of the fabric. They are used for both practical and decorative purposes. Still, the primary function is to reduce bulk from the seam allowance underneath. Top stitching might seem intimidating, but lining the presser foot up to the edge that you're guiding to make it very easy. You can use top stitching on any project, from curtains to blanket to pockets on the front of a shirt. Next is the double top stitch. Like a top stitch seam, but completed the second time. These seams are more secure than the top stitch seam alone, and it allows the bulk from the seam allowance to be distributed more evenly, providing an even smoother finish. Double top stitch seams are often used for blanket edges and pocket borders, or something similar, both to help strengthen the project's high traffic areas and stabilize shape. And it can look sharp too. Next, we have the edge stitch, which is very similar to the top stitch, with the difference that the stitch here should not be seen or hidden. So, you will sew or create stitch on the lining or facing of the garment, following the edge of the seam. So you will not leave a space between your new seam and the seam you already have. After doing the straight stitch, press it to stay in place. Instead of folding the seam allowance on the outer fabric, edge stitch from the seam. The edge stitch is used along a folded edge or around the inside edge of a facing. It can also be used as a decorative edge just along the ditch of a seam to add some detail. This stitch will give you a lovely finish to a sleeveless garments or necklines, for example. Last is the French seam. It may not sound very easy, but I tell you that this seam is very straightforward, and once you know the process, you will probably find it very easy. French seams are very flattering visually, both on the inside and outside of the garment. This is a seam where the wrong sides of the fabric edges are sewn together and are then tucked between the right sides and sewed down again. The raw edges are tucked away and smooth. This leaves both the right side and wrong side of the seam looking clean and finished. French seams are often used within fabrics, but they can also be used when garments or pieces will not have a lining, such as a bag or a shirt. Regardless of which you choose to do, this type of seam leaves a clean look inside of the fabric and does not affect the outside. This method is often used on dresses and other garments that will go without lining. And there you have it. You know how to finish a seam in 5 different ways.